The bright lights of the auditorium shone straight into Amara's face as she took her first step onto the stage. The microphone felt far away, but the sound of the laughter didn't. It came quick and sharp, accompanied by cruel whispers and eyes scanning her up and down as if measuring her. A group of students in the third row was already laughing openly, and someone in the back let out a mocking whistle. She tried to ignore it, adjusting the microphone with trembling hands, but then she heard, loud and cutting, "Get off the stage! Nobody wants to see that ugly girl!" The laughter exploded like a wave crashing over everything. Amara's heart pounded, heat rushing to her face and burning her cheeks. Unable to hold the crowd's gaze, she stepped back, then again, and turned away. The curtains closed behind her, muffling the noise, but not the weight of the humiliation. Hours earlier, at home, she had been standing in front of the mirror, smoothing out the light blue dress her mother had sewn so carefully. Her grandmother, sitting in the armchair, smiled in that calm way of hers, repeating that she was beautiful, no matter what anyone said. And beside the photo on the shelf, her mother with a young Michael B. Jordan at graduation, Amara tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, this day could be special. "Hurry up, Amara, you're going to be late." Her mother's voice called from the kitchen, accompanied by the smell of fresh coffee and bread baking in the oven. Amara appeared in the hallway, adjusting the hem of the light blue dress her mother had made for her a few weeks earlier. Her fingers still trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric at her waist. The stitching was simple, but each thread carried the patience and love of someone who wanted her daughter to feel pretty and confident. "Relax, Mom. It's still early," she answered, though her voice betrayed her nerves. In the living room, her grandmother sat in the armchair near the window, watching her closely. The soft morning light streamed in, catching every silver strand of hair pulled into a loose bun. She gave a small smile, resting her hands on the armrests. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she said, with a firmness that left no room for doubt. "No matter what they say out there, remember, beauty is in who you are, not in what they want to see." Amara paused for a moment, took a deep breath and returned the smile. But deep down, a pang of insecurity still sat like a knot in her throat. As she slipped on her shoes, her gaze wandered to the bookshelf. Among old books and framed photos, there was one picture that always caught her attention. In it, her younger mother, wearing a graduation gown, stood next to a smiling young man in a dark suit. His arm rested over her mother's shoulders, and the two seemed to share a quiet secret. The name came to mind without effort: Michael B. Jordan. Her mother had told her they grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, and that he had always been kind and a dreamer. "Still staring at that picture?" her mother asked, appearing in the doorway and wiping her hands on her apron. "Your grandma told you the story again, didn't she?" Amara smiled sheepishly, fiddling with the simple earring she wore. "I just like imagining what it was like." She left the sentence hanging, as if not wanting to reveal the whole thought. Her mother walked over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Today is your day. Don't think about anyone else. Go out there and sing like you're alone in your room." Outside, the muffled sound of a passing bus reminded Amara that time was ticking. She grabbed her small bag with the notebook where she had written down the lyrics of the song she would perform. Her hands were sweaty, but anticipation made her heart race. "Come on, honey, we'll take you," her mother said, already grabbing the keys. Her grandmother rose carefully, and before Amara could leave, held both of her hands. "Promise me you'll hold your head high, no matter what happens." "I promise, Grandma." The three of them stepped out of the house. The morning air was cold enough to make Amara hold her dress close to her legs. The low sun reflected off puddles left by the night's rain. On the way to the car, she heard laughter and conversations drifting from the neighbors' houses. It was school event day, and it seemed like the whole community was getting ready to watch. In the back seat, as her mother drove, Amara stared out the window, watching the neighborhood go by. The corner bakery with a line at the door, the barbershop already open, the smell of bread mixing with gasoline. Each image seemed to frame that moment of anticipation. The school soon came into view, its light brick building standing tall, flags swaying lazily on the pole. Cars were already parked outside, and students streamed steadily through the main gate. The murmur of voices and the distant sound of instruments tuning floated from the auditorium. "We're here," her mother announced, parking near the entrance. Amara took a deep breath and opened the door. The dress swayed lightly in the breeze, and the shy warmth of the sun touched her face. She knew that in just a few minutes she would be standing before the entire school. Her heart beat so hard it echoed in her ears, but along with it came the memory of her grandmother's words. "You're beautiful, no matter what they say." With one last glance at the car, she adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and started walking toward the auditorium, trying to steady the mix of fear and hope swirling inside her. Next to perform, Amara Santos, singing "Rise," announced the coordinator's firm voice into the microphone, echoing through the auditorium. The sound of chairs scraping, whispers and hurried footsteps filled the air. Standing backstage, Amara took a deep breath and clutched her notebook to her chest. The fabric of the dress her mother had sewn now felt heavier, as if every stitch were made of lead. She heard scattered applause, but couldn't tell whether it was meant as encouragement or just a formality. She took a hesitant step toward the stage. The lights blinded her for an instant, and the audience became a blur of indistinct faces. The chatter died down slightly, but not completely. In the back, a few students were still on their phones. Others laughed quietly, and some teachers tried with firm stares to impose silence. Amara walked to the center of the stage, adjusted the microphone to her height, and looked at the crowd. She recognized a few classmates, 2 or 3 familiar parents, and, off to the side, her friend Larissa, giving her a discreet wave. The knot in her stomach tightened. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. That was when, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, Trent's voice cut through the air. "Get off the stage! Nobody wants to see that ugly girl!" The impact was immediate. Nervous laughter spread, at first in small ripples, then swelling into full-on bursts of laughter from several parts of the auditorium. The sound reverberated off the walls, as if each laugh had been multiplied. Amara froze, feeling her face grow hot. Heat climbed her cheeks until they burned. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. The microphone was still in her hand, but now it felt twice as heavy. The teachers glanced at each other, some visibly uncomfortable, others trying to act. One man in the front row furrowed his brow and started to rise, but stopped halfway, as if unsure what to do. Trent, sitting in the third row, leaned back in his seat with a smug smile, satisfied with the reaction he'd provoked. The friends around him laughed, nudging each other as if it were the best joke of the day. The silence Amara had been trying to keep inside herself broke with an involuntary murmur of pain. Too low for the microphone to catch, but loud enough for her to feel exposed. She looked down at the floor, at her trembling hands, then toward the side exit of the stage. She took one step back, then another, and before she could convince herself to stay, she was already walking quickly toward the curtain. She passed backstage, without looking at anyone, ignoring the faint call of a staff member holding a clipboard. When she stepped through the side door, the cool air of the hallway hit her like a soft slap, but brought no relief. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back with the stubborn strength of someone who had learned early that crying in front of others was like opening a wound everyone wanted to see. Across the auditorium, in the last row, a teacher with short hair and rectangular glasses quietly pulled her phone from her pocket. Pretending to rummage through her bag, she unlocked the screen and began typing a quick message, her eyes darting between the phone and the stage. "You need to come. It's about Amara. It just happened." The message was sent in seconds. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, straightened the scarf around her neck and, with a tense expression, stood up to leave the auditorium. Meanwhile, behind the gym, Amara was already putting distance between herself and the muffled voices that carried on inside, as if life in the auditorium continued as normal without her. The echo of the laughter still pulsed in her ears, mingling with the sound of her hurried steps on the cement floor. The dress, once a source of pride, now felt like armor, far too heavy to bear. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of Trent's cruel smile or the dozens of eyes that had cut through her in the moment she was exposed. "Amara!" Larissa's voice echoed across the side courtyard, low enough not to draw attention from others, but quick, laced with worry. Amara was huddled behind the gym, sitting on a narrow concrete step, knees together, hands gripping the hem of her blue dress. The cold wind swept through unhindered, carrying the smell of damp grass and earth. The distant sounds from the auditorium, muffled by the walls, still carried echoes of laughter that felt like they were coming from inside her. Larissa approached slowly, holding her backpack with one hand and keeping the other slightly extended, as if she wanted to touch her friend but wasn't sure if she should. I don't even know what to say," she murmured, looking down. "That was awful." Amara didn't answer right away. What could she say? Any word felt too small to cover the emptiness in her chest. The silence between them was filled by the slam of a gym door and the distant bounce of balls on the covered court floor. "I just wish," Amara began, but her voice cracked. She took a deep breath and tried again. "I just wish it had been over quickly." Larissa sat beside her but said nothing more. They stayed there, both staring at the ground, listening to the wind sweeping over the roof and the scattered voices drifting from other parts of the school. Then a new sound began to blend into the background. First, a deep, distant rumble, growing steadily. Then several powerful engines echoing down the school's entrance street. It wasn't the noise of regular cars, there was weight to it, a deliberate cadence of machines built to impress. Amara and Larissa lifted their heads at the same time, trying to understand. "What is that?" Larissa asked, frowning. The noise grew louder, matching a slow, deliberate approach, like there was no rush, only presence. On the far side of the courtyard, some students began running toward the front gate, calling to others with excited voices. Without realizing it, Amara stood up, curiosity pulling her forward. From where they were, they could see part of the access road to the school. And then, rounding the curve, they appeared, 4 large black SUVs with tinted windows, moving in perfectly aligned formation. Sunlight bounced off the metal in near-blinding flashes. The lead car slowed as it neared the gate, the others following suit, forming a precise line. The engines stayed on for a few seconds, rumbling low before going quiet, almost in unison. "Oh my God!" Larissa murmured, half smiling in surprise. "Who shows up at a school like that?" The doors began to open. First, from the front seats, tall men dressed in black stepped out, firm posture, sharp eyes, security, without question. Each took position by the vehicle they'd come from, forming an invisible barrier. From the second SUV, the rear door opened slowly, revealing the figure that made students' eyes widen and phones appear in their hands, as if by magic. Michael B. Jordan stepped out, first one foot, then the other, rising to his full height. He wore a dark leather jacket, a simple t-shirt and jeans, but carried a presence that made formality unnecessary. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but not the deliberate way he surveyed the scene. A murmur spread instantly, like fire catching wind. "It's really him!" No way. Michael B. Jordan! Students pointed, filmed, and some narrated the scene into their own phone cameras. Amara stood frozen, as if her brain couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Her heart sped up in a strange way, not just from surprise, but from the fear that somehow this had something to do with her. Michael walked toward the entrance, flanked closely by 2 bodyguards. One of them cleared a path through the crowd of curious students, asking them to keep their distance. At the gate, Michael removed his sunglasses and spoke to a visibly nervous school staff member who had been waiting for him. Amara couldn't hear the words, but his gesture was clear. He pointed inside, made a quick signal with his hand, and asked something that made the staffer nod immediately. "Where is she?" His voice carried firmly enough to reach several yards away. Amara's stomach dropped. She had no idea why he was here. Not now, not after what had just happened in the auditorium. And as Michael and his small entourage crossed the courtyard, phone cameras tracked them like a movie scene, every second recorded. Larissa glanced at her friend, eyes wide. "I think he's talking about you." Amara swallowed hard, unable to answer. Something told her that the sound of those engines, that unusual arrival, was no coincidence, and that somehow her life was about to change direction. "Where's Amara?" Michael repeated, looking directly at the school staff member who was trying to manage the chaos at the gate. The woman pointed toward the side courtyard, still visibly surprised to see him there. Michael gave a brief nod and began walking in that direction, followed closely by 2 bodyguards. The other men who had stepped out of the SUVs stayed near the vehicles, scanning the surroundings with sharp attention. The murmurs among the students grew louder with each step he took. Raised phones recorded every second, and the news was already spreading through the hallways. "Michael B. Jordan is at the school. He's here for someone. He's headed toward the gym." Amara, still behind the gym with Larissa, heard the firm footsteps on the concrete before she saw who it was. When his figure appeared around the corner of the building, for a split second she thought it might be someone else, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But there was no doubt. It was him. Michael stopped a few feet away, removed his sunglasses, and looked straight at her. His eyes, both focused and warm, quickly took in the scene, the wrinkled hem of the dress from the way she'd been gripping it, her hunched shoulders, her still wet gaze. "Amara?" His voice was low, but it carried certainty. She hesitated for a moment before answering with a small nod. Larissa glanced between them, unsure whether to stay or give them space. Michael took 2 more steps toward her. "Your mum sent me a message. I was in town for a community event." He paused briefly, taking a deep breath. "And I came as soon as I heard what happened." Amara blinked rapidly, trying to take in his words. She didn't know which surprised her more, that he was here, or that her mother had reached out to him. "Shall we?" he said, extending his hand, not to pull but as an invitation. She looked at Larissa, who responded with a small smile and a reassuring nod. Michael began walking beside her toward the hallway that led back to the main building. The bodyguards followed discreetly, opening the way ahead of them. Everywhere they passed, students and staff stopped to stare, some recording on their phones, others simply watching, mouths open. The murmur of voices grew louder as they reached the hallway connecting to the auditorium. The doors were half open, and from inside came a mix of voices, the scrape of chairs and restless footsteps. Michael stopped just before stepping inside, positioning himself slightly ahead of Amara. He looked in, immediately spotting Trent in the 3rd row, still surrounded by the friends who had laughed earlier. He entered the auditorium with firm, deliberate steps. Silence fell gradually, as if everyone sensed that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. "You Trent?" Michael asked, his voice carrying easily without a microphone. The boy lifted his chin, startled but trying to keep his composure. "I am." Michael didn't look away. If you can't see beauty here, he gestured toward Amara, still near the doorway. That's your problem, not hers. The silence was absolute. A few cell phones caught every word, the click of record buttons almost audible. Even the teachers, previously frozen, were now watching intently, as if waiting for the next move. Trent leaned back in his chair, with no quick comeback. Michael didn't give him the chance to come up with one. He turned to Amara and, in a calm motion, gestured for her to come to the center of the stage. All eyes followed her as she walked hesitantly, the dress swaying lightly with each step. Michael took the microphone from its stand and, before speaking, looked out over the entire audience. Today, Amara's leaving here with me. The words, delivered with quiet certainty, seemed to hang in the air. And everyone who was here will remember it. Whispers of surprise rippled through the rows, mingling with a few admiring smiles. He placed the microphone back on its stand, turned to her, and offered his arm. Still in disbelief, Amara accepted, feeling the weight of the moment transform into something entirely different from how the day had begun. Together, they walked down the center aisle under the gaze of the entire room, heading for the auditorium doors. The click of a camera shutter echoed as Michael and Amara stepped through the side door of the auditorium. A group of students clustered in the hallway instinctively moved aside, making way without stopping their filming. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing cutting through the hush that had settled over the space. Michael kept his arm slightly angled so that Amara walked beside him, not behind. The gesture, simple but deliberate, put her in plain view, an equal. As they moved forward, he glanced from side to side now and then, as if committing each reaction to memory. When they reached the main lobby, Michael slowed and then suddenly stopped in front of a group shifting uneasily. Trent was in the middle. The boy tried to mask his discomfort, but his nervous smile gave him away. "You the guy who thinks everyone's gonna laugh along when you humiliate someone?" Michael's voice was steady and low, but carried a weight that made even Trent's friends drop their eyes to the floor. The boy drew in a breath, but didn't answer. "Then hear this," Michael continued, gesturing toward Amara. "If you can't see beauty here, the problem is you, not her." Silence spread like a wave, filling every corner of the hall. Not even the distant scrape of chairs being stacked in the auditorium broke the moment. Michael didn't wait for a response. He turned to Amara, touched her shoulder lightly, and kept moving toward the front doors. Cell phone cameras stayed raised, and some teachers, who had stood frozen on stage earlier, now followed the scene with focused eyes, as if realizing they were witnessing something that would outlast the day. When they stepped through the school gates, the 4 SUVs were still in position. One of the security guards opened the rear door of a black vehicle, but Michael signaled him to wait. He turned toward the crowd that had followed to the entrance and took the microphone a staff member had brought over. "I want everyone here to remember this moment." His voice carried clearly through the amplified speakers. "Today, you saw someone try to tear another person down with words. And you also saw that we always have the choice to stand up and not let it slide." He looked at Amara and, without breaking eye contact, added, "And today, she's not leaving here alone." A ripple ran through the crowd, mixing with a few tentative claps that quickly grew stronger. Phones caught every second, camera flashes sparking like a movie premiere. Michael then gestured for her to get into the car. Amara hesitated for a moment, still processing the weight of what had just happened, but then obeyed. The sound of the door closing was like the final period to that scene, though in truth, it was only the start of another. The SUVs began to move, pulling away in a small convoy under the fixed gaze of everyone left behind. Inside, Amara leaned back against the leather seat, taking her first deep breath since stepping on stage that morning. Michael, sitting beside her, removed his sunglasses and set them on the center console. "You know, Amara," he said, looking straight at her, "the courage you showed today, Just facing it, even if you did it by staying quiet, is bigger than you think. She lowered her eyes, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, almost too small to notice. For the first time that day, she didn't feel only shame or sadness. She felt strength too. Outside, cell phones were still recording, but inside the quiet comfort of the car, she realized something had shifted, not just for her, but for everyone who had seen it happen. The video started circulating on people's phones before Michael and Amara had even left the school street. In less than an hour, it was in every WhatsApp group in town, then on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The title, simple and attention-grabbing, varied depending on who posted it. Michael B. Jordan stands up for bullied student, golden moment at Jefferson School, or popular kid shut down by celebrity in front of everyone. The comments multiplied fast. Some praised Michael's courage, others applauded Amara's composure, and a few even tried to defend Trent, but they were quickly drowned out by a wave of disapproval. With every like, share, and repost, the story grew, and so did the pressure on the school administration. The next morning, the doorbell rang at Amara's house just after 9. Her mother opened it to find Ms. Sonia, the same teacher who had sent Michael the message the day before. "We need to talk," Sonia said, serious but with a protective look. "The administration has called an emergency meeting." Amara, sitting on the couch, felt her stomach tighten. She was still processing everything, trying to deal with the avalanche of messages flooding her phone from people she knew and complete strangers alike. In the school's conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Trent was there, seated beside his parents, who avoided making eye contact with anyone. His mother's face was rigid, as if she'd rather be anywhere else. His father sat with his arms crossed, staring at the table. The principal began to speak. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable and has gone viral in a way that brought huge exposure to our school. We must respond clearly and responsibly." Trent's parents exchanged quick glances, and his mother opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off. "The decision has been made. Immediate suspension for 3 days and mandatory participation in the city's anti-bullying program." The principal's tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Trent lowered his head, and for a moment he looked remorseful, but no one could tell if it was for what he'd done or for the embarrassment of being there. Meanwhile, outside, a few local reporters waited to get a comment from anyone involved. When Trent's parents exited, the cameras turned toward them. "Any comment on what happened?" a reporter asked, microphone in hand. "No comment," his father said, hurrying away. The suspension made the evening news, accompanied by clips of the video and the online reaction. Amara watched with her mother and grandmother, feeling something strange, a mix of relief and disbelief. The next day, when she returned to school, everything felt different. No longer did indifferent stares follow her through the halls. Now there was curiosity, whispers, even a few knowing smiles. It was as if everyone was seeing her for the first time, and while part of that felt good, it also carried weight. It was in that atmosphere that, near the end of the morning, an office staff member came into her classroom and said, "Amara, the principal wants you to go to the front entrance." She found it odd, but went. When she arrived, she saw Michael standing beside one of the black SUVs, waiting. Some students outside already had their phones raised again. "Ready to head out?" he asked with an easy smile. "Now?" she said, surprised. "Now." He held the door open for her. As she climbed in, Amara felt the steady gaze of those watching and realized, for the first time, that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been belittled, ignored, or ridiculed, and this time she wasn't facing it alone. The SUV moved slowly down the residential street, the soft purr of the engine sounding almost like a whisper in the stillness that filled the car's interior. Amara, leaning back in the rear seat, kept her eyes fixed on the window, watching the scenery slide past, houses with low walls, neatly kept gardens, children playing on the sidewalks, and neighbors peeking out with curiosity as the convoy of black SUVs rolled by. The tinted windows caught the afternoon sun, and from inside, it felt like they were in a separate world, protected, insulated from everything beyond the glass. Michael, sitting beside her, stayed quiet for a few moments, studying her discreetly. Then, as if deciding to open a door to a conversation that needed to happen, he broke the silence. "You know," he said, glancing at her briefly before looking ahead again, "the last time I saw you, you were just a baby." Amara pulled her gaze from the window, her brow furrowing slightly in curiosity. "Really?" "Yeah." A soft smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, his voice taking on a nostalgic tone. "It was at a barbecue at your mom's house. She and I had been friends since we were kids, went to school together all the way through high school. I'd just started working as an actor and stopped by to say hi. And there you were, in her arms, wearing this enormous yellow dress that practically swallowed you whole." Amara let out a small laugh, trying to picture it. "My mom never told me that part. She probably didn't want you thinking I'd been keeping tabs on your life," he said with a quiet chuckle. "But today, when she sent me that message, I knew I couldn't ignore it." Her smile faded into a deep breath. The memory of what had happened in the auditorium still pulsed inside her, the laughter, the cruel stares, the phones in the air, and the way Michael had stepped in without hesitation, like there had never been any barrier between them. "Thank you for that." Her voice was soft, but full of a sincerity that didn't need more words. Michael shook his head slowly. "Don't thank me." His tone was firm, but kind. "I just did what anyone should do. But since I'm here, I want to tell you something. I understand more than you think." She turned slightly toward him, intrigued. "Understand what?" "What it's like to feel invisible." He rested one arm along the back of the seat, angling his body toward her. "Early in my career, I heard a lot of the same kinds of things you heard yesterday. People said I didn't have the right look, the right type, that I'd never land major roles. And every time someone said that, it felt like they were trying to shove me into a corner, a place where I couldn't be seen or heard." His words found a quiet place inside her. Amara looked down at her own hands, fidgeting with the fabric of her dress. "The difference," he continued, lowering his voice, "is that I had people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And that changed everything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy in a way that said they were both taking in the moment. And that's why—" Michael leaned forward slightly, picking up a black leather portfolio from beside him. He set it gently in her lap. "I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. She's a fashion designer, works in design and garment creation. I thought you might like to meet her." Amara's eyes widened in surprise. "Fashion? How did you—" "Your mom told me," he said with a small smile. "She said you're always sketching dresses in your notebooks, coming up with designs, dreaming about creating your own pieces." With tentative fingers, she opened the portfolio. Inside was an elegant invitation printed on thick, high-quality paper, the logo of a renowned atelier embossed in gold. Beside it was a handwritten card in black ink. "Looking forward to meeting you. Can't wait to create together." The sight of it made her heart race. It was like someone had suddenly opened a door in front of her, a door to a future that had always seemed too far away to reach. The SUV took the last turn onto her street. Michael watched her for a few seconds, more serious now. "You have talent, Amara, and you can't let one bad moment define who you are or how far you can go." His words fell over her like both an anchor and a push forward. The vehicle stopped smoothly in front of the gate. On the porch, her mother and grandmother were waiting, her mother with a nervous smile, her grandmother with her hands clasped and eyes brimming with emotion. Michael stepped out first, walked around the car and opened her door. As she walked beside him to the entrance, Amara felt the moment etching itself into her memory. At the door, he turned to her and said, "Today the world saw who you are." His voice was calm but carried weight. "Never hide that." She nodded, feeling the weight and strength of his words. Michael stepped back, heading for the SUV. When he got in and the door closed, Amara stood there looking down at the invitation she now held with both hands. Her heart was racing, not from the fear or shame of what had happened in the auditorium, but from the concrete hope of what might come next. The spotlights came on all at once, bathing the runway in an almost ethereal glow. Amara closed her eyes for a moment and drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight and the lightness of the moment. When she took her first step, the sound of her heel touching the floor echoed softly, as if the whole world were tuned into her alone. The fabric of the dress, conceived on paper, shaped by her hands and sewn with every stitch steeped in patience and love, moved with her like an extension of her own body. It flowed lightly, catching the light in a way that seemed to give back something that came from within her: confidence, calm, and a touch of boldness. The audience was full, a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces, but all eyes were on her. In the midst of so many, one point stood out. In the very front row sat her grandmother, hands folded in her lap, body leaning forward slightly, eyes glistening. The brightness in her gaze outshone any spotlight in the room. Months had passed since that day in the auditorium, the day Amara had run to the courtyard, trying to escape the suffocating weight of laughter. Today, the silence over the crowd was different. Not the silence before humiliation, but the silence before applause. Every glance felt curious, attentive, admiring, with not a shadow of cruelty among them. As she moved down the runway, her shoulders stayed square, her chin high, as she repeated to herself the words Michael had spoken at her front door: "Never hide who you are." They were no longer just advice. They were a reminder etched into her skin and soul. Across the way, her mother watched with a proud smile, holding her phone as if it were the most important camera in the world. Amara knew that video would have a special place in the family archives. The dress she wore, ivory in color, delicately embroidered with gold thread, was more than a creation. It was a tribute. She had drawn inspiration from the clothes her grandmother wore in her youth, from the fabrics tucked away in the closet, from the old party stories she'd heard since childhood. It was her way of thanking the women who had raised her, who had taught her to stand tall in any storm. When she reached the end of the runway, she stopped. For a moment, time seemed to slow. She turned gracefully, letting the dress fan out in a calculated sweep, and that's when the sound began. Strong, rhythmic clapping, growing louder with each second. They weren't the polite, lukewarm claps of social convention. They were alive, full of pride and recognition. A warm wave rose through her chest. It wasn't nerves. It was the absolute certainty that she was, finally, exactly where she was meant to be. The show ended, but the warmth of that applause stayed with her. Backstage, classmates, teachers, and even some judges came forward to congratulate her. One art teacher, known for rarely giving compliments, looked her straight in the eye and said, "You have a future in this, and not just a future. You already have a present." Amara smiled but didn't answer right away. She was too busy tracing the path in her mind that had brought her here. The silent mornings in the school hallways, the sketches hidden in the corners of her notebooks, the afternoons spent sewing scraps of fabric she'd found around the house, and the nights when she had doubted herself. When she returned to the audience, her grandmother stood and hugged her tightly, as if to protect her even now that she no longer needed it. "I told you you were beautiful, remember?" she murmured in her ear. Now the world knows it too. Amara closed her eyes, absorbing those words like a precious gift. There was nothing she needed to add. In the days that followed, the video of the show began circulating on local social media. Before long, someone edited it side by side with footage of that day with Michael in the auditorium. The contrast was unmistakable. The girl who had once left the stage with tears in her eyes now owned the runway with a confident smile. Some comments read, "The most beautiful comeback I've ever seen." Others praised not only her talent, but also her courage to keep going, to reinvent herself. That night in her room, Amara opened her sketchbook. She flipped to a blank page. The pencil slid slowly between her fingers. There was no rush. She knew that from now on, time was on her side. As she sketched the first lines of a new dress, a phrase echoed in her mind, soft as a whisper. Sometimes it just takes one person believing for the rest of the world to start seeing, and when the world sees, it starts believing too. Deep down, Amara knew that Runway was not the end. It was only the start of a much bigger chapter. Every step she took from here on would carry the same certainty she had felt when she'd faced that auditorium again, head held high. She had learned that a person's worth isn't measured by what they wear, where they work, or what others say. Talent has no uniform. Intelligence asks no permission. And true brilliance, it can walk in wearing a name badge, a pair of worn sneakers, or a handmade dress. Now that she'd been seen, she would never go back to hiding. And she would make sure to open space for other girls like her, girls who had once been told they weren't good enough, to take their place under the lights.